Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. Respected guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome you tonight to this lecture in the now known series of Al-Furqan lectures, and this particular lecture tonight is organized by the Al-Furqan Center for the Study of Islamic Manuscripts. It's a great pleasure to see you all here tonight. So thank you so much for honoring us with your presence. Tonight's lecture is entitled Qur'an Palaeography and the Fragments of the University of Birmingham. Before I introduce the keynote speaker, I would like to invite Mr Sharaf Yamani, member of the Board of Directors of Al-Furqān, to welcome you on behalf of the board and on behalf of His Excellency, the Chairman, His Excellency Sheikh Ahmed Zaki Yamani. So please, Sharaf.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Tonight I am privileged and honored and tasked to say a few words before our distinguished speaker, as I welcome you all on behalf of our Chairman, Sheikh Ahmed Zaki Yamani, and the Board of Directors, and I welcome Professor Qasim al-Samarrai, a friend of the Foundation and one of its pillars from the early days. And on those early days, over a quarter of a century ago now, the Al-Furqān Islamic Heritage Foundation identified the importance of preserving our written heritage and made editing and cataloging manuscripts the cornerstone of that initiative. And across 3 continents and more than 35 cataloging projects later and 25 publications of edited manuscripts, aided by 21 training courses, the Foundation helped uncover tens of thousands of historical gems. Manuscripts, letters, scrolls, folios that have all enhanced our understanding of our common history. Our main driver is not necessarily to appraise the intrinsic value of these manuscripts. There are many groups who do that very well. But it is rather to decipher the message and content within the body of that manuscript, as well as trace the story and journey of each manuscript across history. A manuscript, as you all know, is fascinating. It can be authored in Baghdad, copied in Cairo, and sold in Fez, only to be discovered hundreds of years later in Sarajevo. The traceable information contained in one piece of an illumination or a folio can resolve historical debates or even open our minds to new perspectives altogether. And one should not shy away from that. We pride ourselves with working with the brightest and most enthusiastic minds in our field, and we aid them by continuing to provide training courses for researchers and students, as well as cataloging and editing projects. But more recently, we are also working on creating and hosting the largest searchable database containing catalogued Islamic manuscripts across the world. The aim is to hopefully grow that data set from the tens of thousands of manuscripts or manuscript cards it already hosts to a more substantial number, over 1 million. I encourage you to visit the website, and if you have any questions, please ask the team here, including Karima, as your feedback is highly appreciated. Now, this summer, an important event was celebrated when Birmingham University announced it had found fragments of potentially the oldest Qur'an the world has seen yet, amongst its Mangana collection of manuscripts. As a Muslim, we rejoiced and took it to further confirm our faith. The academic world praised its survival in such mint condition. The artistic world admired its calligraphy and beauty. and others used it to further their own agenda, whatever it may be. But enters Professor Qasim to spoil the party for some, as he opens our eyes to historical anomalies that we might have missed while we were celebrating the discovery. He asks the questions that we might have ignored while sheltered behind our own confirmation biases. Professor Qasim adds his voice to a number of skeptics around the world, and here in the foundation we are extremely delighted to organize this public lecture, not only because it is timely and relevant, but it will also give us a rare glimpse into the mind of one of the leading professors of paleography and codicology. Now, no matter what conclusions we end up with, whether this is in fact a fragment of the world's oldest Qur'an written by a companion of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or not, we cannot deny the importance of this important finding. This piece of parchment, carbon dated back to important times in our history, was held by great men and women whom were readers, writers, and thinkers. Knowledge itself was transferred through it many times, and the words of the Holy Qur'an was transcribed on it finally. It roamed the Middle East for hundreds of years, and it was only recently found in the beginning of the 20th century by a Chaldean priest as part of a collection expedition funded by Edward Cadbury. And if you do recognize the name, know that you have a sweet tooth like I do. It resides today in the University of Birmingham, and beyond the beautiful messages of the verses of Surah Al-Kahf, Surah Maryam, and Surah Taha, if those 4 pages can speak to us and share their journey, one wonders what stories they can reveal. I know someone who speaks its language very well, and I leave the floor for his introduction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharaf, for being with us tonight and for this background. Actually, he saved me quite a lot of words to be said in the beginning, so I'll just go straight to the topic. You know the background now of tonight's lecture, and I'm happy to share the fact that we just arrived an hour ago from Birmingham. I would like on this occasion to thank the Mingana's collection special team, actually, that welcomed us today, and they gave rare access to Professor Qasim to examine the manuscript, the actual fragments that were found earlier this year. I know that Professor Qasim probably will tell me off after the lecture. He didn't want it to be said anything about him, but I have no choice just to give you a very small brief about. So Professor Qasim will be lecturing tonight on the announced lecture on Qur'an Palaeography and the Fragments of Birmingham. Professor Qasim is a Professor Emeritus of Paleography and Codicology at Leiden, Netherlands. He's an ex-lecturer at the Department of Oriental Studies at Cambridge University, mid of the last century now. So you can imagine his long experience in these fields, not in terms of the experience, not the age. And he has supervised many MA and PhD dissertations on, especially on this focused field, the codicology and paleography. Professor Qasim has published more than 60 books, and we have been honored to have 3 of among these titles published by Al-Furqān Islamic Heritage Foundation, that stands in almost 10 volumes. Also, he participated extensively in national and international congresses, as well as many training courses, and most of them organized by Al-Furqān Islamic Heritage Foundation, as well as other foundations and institutions. Just before I give the floor to our distinguished guest and lecturer tonight, Professor Qasim, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that there is a hashtag at Twitter that will show on the screen now if you want to tweet during this lecture. And there is obviously there is a network here and there is a password. Without further ado, I'm honored and delighted to invite Professor Qasim to address you tonight. So, Professor Qasim, the floor is yours within an hour, hopefully, maximum. And then we'll leave a bit of more space for questions because I'm sure that there are so many interested people who want to ask. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you here and to tell you the truth, nothing but the truth. It is a great moment for me to stand here to refute or to correct a misconception already propagated by a formidable host of the media and some Orientalists. It is indeed not my intention to turn my lecture into a polemical debate. Far from it. But one of the things that bothers me most is the willful ignorance that has been grown day by day and has reached a level where it now constitutes a serious threat to genuine scholarly research and objective scientific scholarship. This has prompted me to share my humble thoughts with you in connection with the so-called discovery of the oldest folios of the Quran at the University Library of Birmingham. I was privileged today, a few years ago, to not inspect, but to examine thoroughly those two folios. The result I will tell you about later. Ladies and gentlemen, I begin by apologizing for my poor English, which is really rusty, and the chaotic and the incoherent sentences. But this may truly be justified and tolerated if only for the simple fact that the truth is a bitter pill. But it remedies all lies. Or, as George Orwell said, in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. A quotation which I hope all the media outlets adopt instead of propagating sensational reports that mislead and misinform the public to suit their whimsical fancy, to sell more for financial benefit. Our topic, ladies and gentlemen, today is indeed a thorny topic and instinctively muddling for those who claim justly or otherwise to be expert in Quranic paleography and codicology. But I here resort to facts, not fiction. Fact one. We possess no dated Quran copy belonging to the first 3 centuries of the Hadith at all. Fact 2. We possess almost 250,000, if not more, fragments and various papyrus scattered all over the world, but not a single one bears a colophon with an explicit date. Thus, from this platform, and I beg your pardon to be arrogant a bit, from this platform, I strongly challenge any scholar working with the Quranic palaeography, and in particular those revisionists, to produce one dated folio belonging to the span of time that lies between the year 40 and the year 250, and that is between 650 and 862 CE or AD. Fact 3. The C14 test is doubtful due to pollution in the atmosphere and the craft of manufacturing parchment in the East. This fact will be dealt with later. Fact 4. The text of the Quran depended from the beginning of the revelation on memory, not writing. As one Orientalist says, the transmission of the Quran after the death of Muhammad was essentially static rather than organic. There was a single text and nothing significant, not allegedly abrogated material could be taken out, nor could anything be put in. Or, as one of the contemporary revisionists likes to put it, the Quran was revealed in actual language, not in scriptural form. The script available at the time of revelation was highly defective. Here is the question: defective in comparison to what? What style? What script? So that it continued little more than an aid for those who knew the text by heart. Being well aware that the oral tradition is the more important and valid one, my former teacher, late Montgomery Watt, formulates the whole process in these words. On the whole, the information which has reached us about the Uthmanic codices suggests that there was no great variation in the actual content of the Quran in the period immediately after the Prophet's death. The order of the surahs was apparently not fixed, and there was many slight variations in reading, but of other differences there is no evidence. The oral tradition is a phenomenon very unique to Islam in memorizing the whole text, though we know that some Buddhist or Hindu monks recite some of their holy texts in their sermons. There were and still are many millions of people who have memorized the whole Quran, and millions of these have learned the Quran via a direct transmission starting from the Prophet himself. They are enumerated with a chain of transmitters, which is called isnads. In the recitation, Qur'an biographical sources, published or unpublished. It is therefore difficult for non-Muslim to believe that in some parts of the world, long religious texts are still fully memorized and transmitted from generation to generation as it is in Islam. Fact 5. In spite of all the information we gleaned from many sources at our disposal in connection with the Uthman copies, which were totally devoid of any diacritical signs, dotting, punctuation, or surahs separations, no copy belonging to Uthman's time ever survived. Though many existing copies have been attributed falsely to him or to some individuals contemporary with him, in short, no early copy of the Quran so far has survived. Fact 6. All the estimates of dating all the existing folios is conjecture, guesswork, with no exception. Fact 7. Although there exist many complete or incomplete copies of the Quran in public or private libraries all over the world, such as the Samarkand 2 copies, the one in the Mosque of Hussein in Cairo being attributed to Caliph Uthman, the copy or copies in the Egyptian Dar al-Kutub, the Sana'a copy recently published by Ersika in Istanbul attributed to Imam Ali, the one in Topkapi Palace Museum attributed as well to Caliph Uthman, several in the Najaf Mausoleum, several in Iran attributed to Ali or to one of his descendants, and elsewhere. But none are dated or bears the name of the scribe. Though Nadim told us or provides us with a list of names of those scribes whose task was only copying the Quran during the Prophet's time and afterwards. Equally significant is the fact that we now possess several dated Syriac manuscripts belonging to the same period as the fragments specified by the radiocarbon dating or earlier. But the question may be asked, why do we not possess any dated Quran copy or a single folio with colophon, to which no one working with the early Qur'an palaeography has ever answered? The reason, in Francois de Roche's opinion, is that the fragmentary state of the evidence at hand and the lack of any direct information as to the date of the copies is usually a major impediment. It is more than impediment. It is a major impediment in studying the early material and have been used as an argument against the dating prior to the 3rd, 9th century. Hard as it may seem, the actual reason which he and others did not contemplate is very simple. It's very simple to see or to contemplate. In order to keep the purity and the integrity of the holy text intact during the 3 centuries, no scribe ever dared to add his name to the holy text. Nonetheless, Al-Nadim died circa 990, relates, I saw many Quran copies written in bulky script on parchment which their copyists mentioned that they are of Ibn Mas'ud's copy of the Quran. I could not find any two of them similar to each other in any respect. He went on. Here he means they have been intentionally faked for sectarian purposes in Baghdad. And this is another story we can come across if anybody asked. In the same vein, he also reports, I saw a copy of the Quran written about 200 years ago. That's about 786, containing the Fatiha Surah only. Al-Nadim here alludes to some narratives which mention that Ibn Mas'ud excluded the Fatiha Surah and the last two surahs from his own copy. He also reports, in my own time, I saw a copy of the Quran in the hand of Ali ibn Abi Talib, with few folios missing. The Banu Hassan, he continues, inherited this copy and handed down this particular copy from generation to generation. But he does not tell us if these copies he saw or inspected contained any colophon. Now, the beginning of the episode. The episode of the Birmingham folio began when the University of Birmingham reported that when a PhD researcher looked more closely at the two folios, she found among the Mingana collection of the university, and the university decided to carry out a radiocarbon dating test. And the results were startling. This is their word. The test carried out by the Oxford University Radiocarbon Accelerators Unit showed that the fragments written on sheep or goat skin were among the very oldest surviving texts of the Quran. These tests provide a range of dates, showing that with a probability of more than 95%, the parchment was from between 568 and 645. The University Director of Special Collections, Susan Worrell, said researchers had not expected in our wildest dreams that it would be so old. Professor David Thomas, professor of Christianity and Islam in the same university, and that's Birmingham, says the dating of the Birmingham folio would mean it was quite possible that the person who had written them would have been alive at the time of the Prophet Muhammad. The person who actually wrote them could have well known the Prophet Muhammad. He would have seen him probably. He would maybe have heard him preach. He may have known him personally. And that really is a quiet thought to believe in. Furthermore, it is also reported that leading Oxford academics said the carbon dating of the parchment, which suggests it dated from between 568 to 645 AD, may change our understanding of the way in which Islam's holy book was compiled. Some historians argue that the earliest of the date range also leaves open the theory of the document was in existence through the Prophet's childhood or even before his birth. That is the gist of the whole episode. Whatever that may be, we know, here comes the fact, we know that some manuscripts of the Quran, along with a great many others, were acquired or stolen by Jane Lewis Aslin de I don't know the name, Chervel, in Egypt, through a diplomatic rivalry between Germany and France to steal the parchment. The story of how the French diplomat de Chervel acquired them is explained to me personally by Professor Dr. David Stephen Powers in his work. Subsequently, the whole collection was sold in 1833 to the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. The other remaining Quran fragments were bought or stolen by John Joseph Marcel, who accompanied Napoleon Bonaparte in his campaign in Egypt and Syria during 1798 to 1801, and consequently ended up also in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. While the remnants of Marcel's Quran folios were sold by his widow to the National Library of Russia in St. Petersburg. The ultimate provenance of all these folios is the Amr ibn al-As Mosque in Fustat of Egypt. In the same manner, now we come to Mingana. In the same manner, the Birmingham part of those manuscripts were purchased by Mingana in 1936, a year before he died, from the German antiquarian dealer in Leiden, where I live, called Erich von Scherling, in Dutch we say Scherling, who acquired them through among other manuscripts via his Egyptian agent. And this we know it from the archive we possess in Leiden. Paradoxically enough, the same lady who stirred up the frenzy about the Birmingham fragment, that's Elba Fadli, was well aware in 211 close similarity of this fragment with the Paris fragments and other fragments. Amazingly, she was herself also involved in the Tübingen fragment, but she cautiously attributed the Tübingen manuscript to the 8th century CE, or Anno Domini, and commented upon some of its variants. This manuscript, and that's Tübingen manuscript, according to the Tübingen report, has now been subjected to radiocarbon dating analysis under the auspices of the Corpus Qur'anicum project, and has been dated to 649-675 CE with 95.4% probability. Now, if we accept such date as genuine, it appears beyond any doubt that the Tübingen fragment is a bit older or a bit younger than the Birmingham fragment, but with only one exception. It did not stir up the same media frenzy. Nevertheless, the wave of such frenzy seemed to have engulfed another two European institutions, the State University of Berlin and the University of Leiden. Both of them claimed to possess the oldest fragment of the Quran, and both have based their claim on the result of the radiocarbon dating only. This is not the end of the apologue. Another report concluded, it may be argued that because radiocarbon dating creates a range of possible ages, there are a handful of other manuscripts in public and private collections which overlap. So this makes it impossible to say that any are definitely the oldest. But the latest possible date of the Birmingham discovery, 645, would put it among the very oldest. Ladies and gentlemen, let us forget for a time being about the hysteria which the media, such as the BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, New York Times, the Daily Mail, the Dutch newspaper, the Volkskrant, Birmingham Mail, and the Independent have created. All of them and other outlets have blown the whole issue up beyond comprehension and proportion. The question why? But the heart of the whole matter lies, as I see it, not so much with the media, which seek sensational news for their public, but with those scholars involved who dare not admit anything counter to the official prevailing declaration, or not willing to admit that what they said or declared in the media is a complete disaster for objective scholarship and sound judgment. Jumping straight away to a conclusion. One of them, for instance, declared that the scribe may have seen the prophet, while the others one declared the Birmingham Quran fragment that could shake Islam after carbon dating suggests it is older than the Prophet Muhammad. This is frankly a hollow mockery. A hollow mockery. Simply, why it is mockery? Simply because it is obviously based on questionable and inconclusive piece of evidence, as we shall see. Furthermore, the Daily Mail published a report on 21st of August, written by Genevieve Newton, in which she claimed that carbon dating found in the pages was produced between 568 and 654. She reinforced her statement by saying, but several historians now say that the parchment may predate Muhammad, my God in heaven. They believe that this discovery would rewrite the early history of Islam. This reporter using they, but she did not substantiate her claim with the name of those supposed several historians in order to know if they are really genuine scholars of illusory and fictitious fakes. She did not mention that. Another journalist wrote, leading Oxford academics this week said carbon dating of the parchment, which suggested It dated from between 568 645 AD, may change our understanding of the way in which Islam's holy book was compiled. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, some Western Orientalists did not trouble their heads about facts, but instead they seem to be deplorably fond of plodding along unmindful of hair-splitting and twisting every small fact to suit their already preconceived notion, just as Dr. Keith Small, who is said to be an expert on Quranic texts at the University of Oxford. He told the Times, this gives more ground to what have been peripheral views of the Qur'an's genesis, such as that Muhammad and his early followers used a text that was already in existence and shaped it to fit their own political and theological agenda, rather than Muhammad receiving a revelation from heaven. Dr. Small's opinion, he was not the only one. Dr. Small's opinion appeared as a shrill echo of Christopher Luxemburg, who claimed that the Quran, or part of the Quran, listen to this, the Quran or part of the Quran are derived from pre-existing Christian Aramaic text that was manipulated to create the Quran we know of today. This chap, without producing the relevant Christian Aramaic part to prove that the Quran is indeed derived from them in order to believe him, but above all, without realizing that the linguistically proven fact that Aramaic language is the mother of Arabic, Hebrew, and Syriac. Just like the Latin is the mother of many European languages. So simply as that. So the similarities, what we found between Arabic, Hebrew, or Aramaic, it is exactly the same as the similarities we find between French, English, Italian, and so forth. There's no difference. But why he singled out only the Quran? Here, answering Dr. Small's preposterous statement, I would say, are we then at liberty, sir, to declare and exclaim as well that the New Testament predated Jesus, and the Old Testament predated Moses, and all the faiths and religions of the world are falsified and fabricated by their founders? Actually, I leave the entire question to the Jewish and Christian theologian to answer him. It is not my task. But in any meaningful scholarly sense, all these ideas propagated by the media on one hand, and by those who are supposed to be scholars in connection with the Birmingham fragment on the other hand, are based on tentative rather than conclusive evidence, as we shall see. Strangely enough, given the ferocious controversies that swirl around this fragment, another impulsive American journalist, wrote a manuscript explicating the teaching of Muhammad while he was still alive provides fodder for the Islamic fundamentalists. For the Islamic fundamentalist extremists to interpret the Quran and other Islamic teachings that much more literally. They will feel further empowered to continue with their schizophrenic outlook of life with their spiritual foot planted in the 7th century. So it turned to be more political than scholarly. That's not all. Some years ago, a Christian missionary website published a ferocious critique against Islam, in which they tried strenuously to single out the discrepancies they claim to have found in the Samarkand copy of the Quran. At that time, it stirred some commotion and indignation among some Muslim scholars, but not so much as did the Birmingham discovery. Paradoxically enough, the entire critique was based on facsimile copy of the Samarkand Quran. As it happened, in the late 19th century, the manuscript was in St. Petersburg, where it was studied by the Russian Orientalist A.N. Shibonin. He gave a detailed account of the codex, examined the peculiarities of the orthography. The interest was so great in the codex that in 1905, Pisarev, this is another Russian Orientalist, was encouraged to publish a facsimile edition. He did this by photographic process after attempting to carefully retrace the text of folios where the writing had been almost or totally obliterated. It has since been recognized that this copy, that Pisarev's re-inking of the text in the dulled folios resulted in many mistakes and interpolations. These deliberate or indeliberate, intentional or unintentional changes of the original text have caused scholars to handle this manuscript with extreme caution. So much so was the case for the benefit of the critique being based on a faulty facsimile. On one hand, and without taking into account the teaching of the Rasm al-Masahif, as explained thoroughly and diligently by al-Baqillani, al-Dani, al-Sijistani, and others on the other hand. This is not an isolated attempt to apply what is called an inner and outer textual criticism to the Quran, in imitation of the already existing many early textual criticism studies being applied to the biblical text, where countless discrepancies have been singled out and thoroughly studied by many Jewish and Christian scholars alike. This is a well-known fact. The most serious scholarly move was initiated in 1858 by a committee in the French Academy des Inscriptions des Ballets, letters, whatever you call it, which organized a scholarly competition with the subject of make a critical history of the text of the Quran. And in French, I don't know French. Faire l'histoire critique des textes du Quran. The initiative resulted in only 2 serious scholarly contributions by the Italian Michael Amari and the German Theodor Noldecker. Noldecker later changed his mind in his second edition. Meanwhile, attempts were made by Noldecker, Goldziher, Arthur Jeffrey, who have argued that the text of the Quran was not committed to writing in the lifetime of the Prophet or of the companions, but the writing of the Quran began around the 2nd or 3rd century of the Hijrah. That is not all. As early as 1912, Mingana himself, when he was 26 years old, with A.S. Lewis, a well-known missionary, published leaves from 3 ancient Qur'an, possibly pre-Uthmanic. Since then, the move lay dormant until the end of the 70s. When the debate about the composition of the date and the date of which the Quran was compiled was stirred up by the hyper-critical schools of thoughts, led by then the leading revisionist John Winsborough. His iconoclast views have soon been adopted by his disciples, Patricia Crone and Michael Koch, in Hagarism. They claimed that there is no hard evidence for the existence of the Quran in any form before the last decade of the 7th century. And the tradition which places this rather obscure revelation in its historical context is not attested before the middle of the 8th century. It should be noted here that the culmination of the revisionist trend was symbolized then in the publication of Salman Rushdie's novel, The Sanatic. You complete. The Sanatic Verses in 1988. A trend which is still living and kicking vigorously in some European and American Orientalist circles, official circles and official academic institutions until today. Let us now, ladies and gentlemen, turn our attention to find out the missing link or the apparent connection between the parchment and the radiocarbon dating, to explore the hidden secret in both. Parchment, as such, is most commonly made of calfskin, sheepskin, or goatskin. It was historically used for writing documents in the East and the West. Parchment, as such, is limed, scrubbed, rubbed, and dried under tension. It is not tanned and is thus different from leather. The process of making parchment differs considerably between the East and the West. In pro-Islam poetry, one encounters rich references to writing, kitab, books, parchment, raq, hide, adim, papyrus, qirtas, and inkpot, dawat, and so forth. We therefore infer from the references that the manufacturing of parchment was a thriving industry in pre-Islamic time in Mecca, Medina, Ta'if, and elsewhere in Hijaz. Please figure 1 and 2. Here is how they collect the skin of sheep and goats in Morocco. Almost 3 million animals slaughtered in one day, and the skin collected tax-free from all over Morocco to be sold for a few pences. Number 2, please. And here is how the parchment was made. In the Middle East and North Africa, particularly in Morocco, the leather industry is still flourishing. The term Morocco, as a fine, flexible, hand-grained leather of goat skin tanned with sumac, is well known to Western binders. Even today, the making of parchments for drums, tambourines, and other musical instruments is flourishing in the East as well in the West. Notwithstanding the striking similarity between making parchment in the East and the West, the main difference lies in the materials and substances used in the making of parchment, such as lime, alum, Epsom salts as a purgative, and slabs of sea salt being mined and exported, which in Morocco is called milha hayya, still exist. While the parchment is in the process of drying in its frame, a number of different pre-treatments, such as pumice stone powder and chalk, were sometimes rubbed into the surface of the wet skin. That is in the West. What I said just now was in the West. In the East, the weather and temperature play a crucial role in the production of parchment. We are informed by Nadim himself that there were 2 kinds of parchments. One was extremely stiff and hard because gypsum solution mingled with calcium hydroxide, dibaghat al-noura, was used in the production and coating. The other one was called kufi, in which dates, dibaghat al-tamr, was used. It made it smooth, supple, flexible, and pliable. Such a method of parchment production seems to have been common in the East, where some organic substances, here listen to this, when some organic substances were used. Thus, we can infer from these data that the organic substances play a crucial role in determining the result of the radiocarbon test, as we shall see shortly. Palaeography, ladies and gentlemen, as a scholarly discipline, requires much patience, not radiocarbon dating. It requires much patience, prudence, and above all, extreme knowledge and great experience, which are gained and grained. Palaeography as a scholarly discipline requires much patience, prudence, and above all extreme knowledge, and great experience which are gained and grained through persistent and keen interest in observing, discerning, utilizing every minute detail at hand. It becomes an embedded hobby, or rather a special gift, which occupies the heart and soul of the researcher. Palaeography is crucial in the study of the early copies of the Quran. Its role in studying the Birmingham parchment is crucial as well, to provide us with direct or indirect evidence about the approximate date. Now we come to the radiocarbon dating explained by Oxford Laboratory. In the very words of Oxford Laboratory itself, not mine, they say, for carbon dating to be possible, the material must once have been part of a living organism. This means that things like stone, metal, and poetry cannot usually be directly dated by this means, unless there is some organic material embedded or left as a residue. The radiocarbon date tells us when the organism was alive, not when the material was used. This fact should always be remembered when using radiocarbon dates. The dating process is always designed to try to extract the carbon from a sample which is most representative of the original organism. This simplified approach described above, this is still the words of Oxford Laboratory. This simplified approach described above does not tell the whole story. There are two reasons why the radiocarbon date is not a true calendar age. One, the atmospheric variation. The radiocarbon concentration of the atmosphere has not always been constant. In fact, it has varied significantly in the past. Further complications arises when the carbon in a sample has not taken a straightforward route from the atmosphere to the organism and thence to the measured sample. The Oxford Laboratory continues. Common examples are contamination, where material from the soil or conservation work becomes incorporated into the sample, resulting in an admixture of carbon with different radiocarbon content. With different carbon content. The purpose of chemical pre-treatment is to remove all such material. Number two, reservoir effect. There occur, for example, when some of the carbon reaches the sample by way of the ocean, because the radiocarbon composition of the ocean differs from that of the atmosphere. This can lead to erroneous dates. Stable isotope measurements can be used to see if this effect is present, since The stable isotope concentration of the ocean is also different. Here we may simply ask, has the Oxford Laboratory carried this process out before announcing the result of the carbon dating? The answer, no. Now, do we need another proof to justify our assertion that the radiocarbon dating is notoriously unreliable? Is unreliable tool upon which to base any hurried judgments? But the most profound challenge faced by modern paleographers dealing with the Quran is the actual fact that we do not possess explicitly any dated parchment. Therefore, it is rather impossible to be certain of any other evidence provided either by carbon dating or by style of script. I here skip the argument of the style. And I skip again how the Quran was written down. To shorten the time, anybody of you can read this later. We come to how those institutions obtained all those fragments. When Napoleon set first his foot in Cairo, he formed a special council, Diwan, to govern the capital. A council that consisted of 9 sheikhs under the chairman of Sheikh Abdullah al-Sharqawi, the rector of Al-Azhar Mosque at that time. The rector of Al-Azhar himself tells us the following, which has some bearing at our interest. He told us the following: when the French soldiers entered Al-Azhar Mosque, they spread out all the books of Al-Azhar library and began to search them, thinking there is some gold hidden in them. The Jews, who were their translators and interpreters, took with them manuscripts and precious masahif, precious Quran. Here we may ask, did they buy them from the rector or just stole them? No, I think they bought them. The very Russian website of J.J. Marcel reports that the Marcel collection, I mentioned already that part of the Marcel manuscript were sold to St. Petersburg in Russia. The very Russian website of J. Marcel reports that the Marcel collection contains about 2,000 parchment leaves, forming 130 items. All of them were acquired by Marcel in the mosque of Amr ibn al-As in Old Cairo, where they had been kept, buried in the ground. It was a custom to bury books that went out of use due to deterioration. It is then quite natural that the leaves found in such burials are not usually in very good physical conditions and have often been stained, torn, eaten by rodents, scorched by fire, or bear damp patches. This report, if it is correct, together with the rector's report, certainly confirms my assumption I previously mentioned, that the Fustat fragments which Marcel acquired then were not bought, as de Roche tried to convince us. He claimed in one of his works that Marcel acquired them, he bought them, but they are stolen. But they were simply stolen from both mosques. It is indeed a form of plunder by stealth. The other problem which deserves our attention here is the palimpsest of Sana'a, which have been the subject of much debate among Western and neo-Westernized revisionists. There is something fishy about the whole debate, but finally a graphical transcription was made for one of the Sana'a palimpsests by Hadiya Gurtman, which is now available on the net. I took it from the net. When I compared the graphical construction of Hadiya Gurtman of Sana'a palimpsest, and she gave the number, folio, with the actual text of the Quran, I found that the folio contains part of Ayah 122 until Ayah 130 of Surah At-Tawbah. At the end, there appears a sentence of 4 words, which can be read, Hadi Khatimat Surah At-Tawbah. That means this is the end of Surah At-Tawbah, followed by a crude ornament separating the 2 surahs. Next begin Ayah 1 until Ayah 4 of Surah Maryam. I think it's very difficult to read, but it is readable. Ayah 4 to Surah Maryam, with the basmala on 2 lines. Look at the basmala in 2 lines. Here. Her reconstruction contains 3 or 4 vertical or semi-vertical dots. This you can find it in different places. In some places, and some reading, and this contains some reading errors committed by the lady herself, which is understandable in deciphering a palimpsest, because the eraser was incomplete. But in spite of the radiocarbon dating, the crude ornament and the dots between the ayah indicate that it belongs to the 2nd century, but not earlier. The whole text tallies verbatim with the Quran. The only difference is the sequence of the arrangement, which does not tally with either the Mus'haf ibn Mas'ud or with the Mus'haf of Ubay, as reported by Nadim and Al-Baqillani. Thus, the claim of Sadighi and Qodarzi that there is a broad agreement with Ubay Codex is null and void. Moreover, Sadighi and Bergman, on the other hand, emphasize that in the codices of Ibn Mas'ud and Ubay ibn Ka'b, the surahs are arranged in different order, relative to one another, but within the surah, the codices generally have the same arrangement of sentences as the standard Quran. My God, how did they know that? We don't have a copy of Ubay ibn Ka'b, neither a copy of Ibn Mas'ud's Quran. What we have only what the writer of Al-Masahif wrote to us, and Ibn Nadim and the rest. How did they know that? They just say it as they like. Now, this is the original of the Quran, and this is the palimpsest. For them, this palimpsest was written on parchment after being washed out. Sorry. This parchment was washed out, and then another text of the Quran was written in. Right. Yes, in Yemen. Yes. But this one not in Yemen. This is Stanford. It is in America. No. Paleographically speaking, please listen to this. Paleographically speaking, the thickness of the ink in a nib or the reed or the quill varies from the beginning of the word or even the letter to the end of it, though it does appear equally the same or even similar to the naked eye. In fact, the end of the stroke would appear faintly colored under a magnifying glass or under an ultraviolet beam or an X-ray. Therefore, it is almost impossible to discern the entire word, let alone the page of the first layer, if it is washed out thoroughly. By washing out, I don't imply that water was being used. No. There are lots of methods to take the ink of the parchment or paper without using water. And this I explained it in my own work, in my work about paleography, in detail. To begin with, the re-inking, or as they call it, hand-drawn tracing, and the reconstruction of the text from the image tracing photo by one of the contributor or by both, visible on both sides of the parchment. The graphic of re-inking on both sides is notoriously incorrect because it is extremely difficult to observe the first layer as the letters are erased either partly or wholly and covered by the second layer. Moreover, this particular palimpsest has been described as a pre-Ottomanic copy. The carbon dating of this palimpsest is not conclusive by the very testimony of the authors themselves. They say the result of carbon dating indicates that the parchment was 68% probability of belonging to the period between 614 and 656. It has 95% probability of belonging to the period between AD 578 and 669. And anyhow, Desroches himself rightly observed that if Sadeghi and Bergman finding about short vowels marks is correct, it could become an additional argument for a late date. For the original codex, Sadeghi and Bergman further alleged that Sana'a 1 manuscript was produced no more than 15 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. Desroches, on his part, politely overlooked the other features said to exist in the text. The question is, do we find such features in Ottomanic copy, let alone pre-Ottomanic? That is, if we have one at hand. We don't. Now, the most important thing to prove that this palimpsest was discarded because it contains some omissions and mistakes and scribal mistakes for in the word hasana, the missing word hasana, and those here not available. Why it is missing? Because the scribe forgot. He forgot to put 2 words. The question is, when he wrote ربنا آتنا في الدنيا وفي الآخرة وقنا عذاب النار, آتنا what? Lord, give us a little, give us in this world and in thereafter. Here the question, give us what? So he missed 2 words. The same happened when in, I think here or the other one. Will you give the other one? When come the missing other one is رؤوسكم. And the question is احلقوا what? ولا تحلقوا حتى يبلغ. تحلقوا what? Your beard, your underarm, your what? And the same with صدقة. It's just forgot to put it in the text. When he discovered this scribe, when he discovered he made mistakes, he took the folio, very simple, and discarded. And he used another folio. And come another one, and he saw discarded the folio. He washed it out, and he wrote another text for it, on it. And that was the reason. And thank you very much indeed for listening patiently to me. Wassalamu alaikum. But I can assure you, you missed quite a lot. But what shall I do with the authority, with the dictatorship? Yes. Luckily, I am very glad to have examined those 2 parchments. To start with, both are covered with thick layer of Arabic gums. With thick Arabic gum. Take it from me. The second observation, these 2 folios are not actually original. They are palimpsests, just like the other one. The 2 were washed completely but thoroughly by an expert. Washed thoroughly by an expert and then was reused. Because I found traces of the first layer under the ultraviolet beam. But I think the whole parchment does not belong to the 1st century. They belong to the end of the 2nd century and the 3rd century, at the beginning of the 3rd century. Not at all to the 1st century. And I stick to my findings, which I said it clearly. I said whatever the outcome of carbon dating, I still strongly maintain my strong conviction that the Birmingham parchment, with all the distinct features of them, the script dotting using golden and red ink, as well as the separation of the ayahs and surahs, etc., point to the end of 2nd century and the 3rd century. Finally, My thanks should be due to the staff of the University of Birmingham who allowed us to examine the parchment, and I thank them wholeheartedly, and thank Sharif and Sali and all the staff of the foundation for allowing me to speak to you, and I am pleased to see you all and to speak to you all. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Qasim. On your behalf, we are late. We started a bit late. We are already quite late. I think probably we'll put a limit to 7:45, hopefully to finish with the questions. I'm sure there are so many questions, but before that, I would like to thank again Professor Qasim for his very informative lecture. I apologize for this pressure put on you, but I think that we need a bit more time. I'm sure that there are so many points missed out from the lecture. Hopefully we will print out the lecture, the complete one, and
Yes.
will be hopefully in your hands in a few days or probably in a month or so time. I'll start taking a few questions. We'll try to keep it within the limit of the time. I'll start with Professor Salim, then Dr. Tashkandi, and who else? One question, one answer, please. Yeah. Professor Salim.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Excellent. Thank you so much. It's really a breath of fresh air to hear a scholarly account of this fantastic discipline. When I first saw this published, it didn't take me much to discover. I mean, I have no expertise whatsoever, but all I know is that dotting and coloring and so on, it was very late in the writing of scripts of Arabic. And so when I learned when I was a child. So when I looked at it, I thought, oh, well, God, I mean, that can't be right. How does the carbon dating cope with that? And hence wrote to you and others and so on. I'm not sure really at the moment now where we are. I mean, it doesn't take a paleographer to actually tell that this is, because dotting and so on is well known to have come much later in the Islamic script. Now, we want to know more about this patch, the parchment, and the carbon dating and the chemistry or whatever, what proof there is. It could be that it was alive at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and people have used it many times until it was used by that person later. I mean, we want an expert opinion on the parchment itself, because the writing is obvious, isn't it? Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, the writing is obvious, but I don't agree with you that the parchment belongs to the time of the Prophet at all. No, it was contaminated all the time, from the beginning of the slaughter to the end. So it gives us no date whatsoever. This is why I think it is not older than the time when it was written. Possibly a few years, say 10 years. Manuscripts which I accumulated through 50 years of my lifetime, than relying on carbon dating. Yes, what I saw now, when I saw the two fragments or the two folios, I knew immediately that it is impossible to be the first century. Immediately, without even a testing, and then I tested the thing in front of my two friends, and I tasted the two fragments thoroughly, and I wasn't changed. My conviction was not changed at all. Yes.
Sorry, what added evidence do we have other than the writing itself? I mean, if you say that it could have, the parchment itself could have been written at the same time, I mean, that is very risky, because what we're now saying is that the radiocarbon testing is, you know, what, plus or minus 100 years, plus or minus 50 years. There has to be some margin of error. And even in that, there has to be some sort of scientific judgment, not based just on experience. There has to be some, you know, I'm lost. I really am.
I am not.
Well, you have to explain to us in a scientific way of how does this parchment, you know, how, I mean, you are challenging it carbon dating, right? You're saying that the carbon dating is wrong.
Professor Hassani, lots of things you know and you feel, but you cannot explain. You know and you feel, but you cannot explain, even by science. I mean, if you are a scientist and I gave you this, try it by carbon dating, how many years you will give it to it? It is half a year. It is no more than half a year. But if you compare this, the surface, under my glass, with the surface which I have seen today, it is totally different. So the structure of such parchment is totally different than the structure of the parchment I today saw. It is a bit loose, and once you know all this, plus the other things you noticed in the parchment, it gives you the conviction or reinforce your experience and conviction that this parchment is not old as they think. Let me put it this way.
I'm sorry, I really must, I can't let go. In your expert opinion,
yes,
what is the oldest parchment that we have? How long parchments last?
the oldest parchment we have?
Yes.
I have no idea.
I mean, is it 1,000 years? Do they last 1,000 years?
It lasted more than that.
So why do you say that that parchment was only recently, and the writing and the parchment, they were close to each other? What makes you decide that? Why can't you say that that parchment was 100 years old when they wrote on it?
It is impossible.
Why?
It is impossible. Otherwise, the structure would have been would have been by, how do you say it? Not loose.
Texture.
More solid.
It would have been more solid. Right.
More solid.
But you just said that the date, by using date, which is from the east, it makes it more flexible.
It is flexible.
Right.
But I say the structure. The structure of the parchment is totally different from a new and old.
Okay.
The old, it is loose. The structure is loose. You can see it under the
Right.
under the thing.
Yes.
Under in this, you don't see it. You see it solid. This is one of the reasons that convinced me that this is not so old as they think.
Okay, thanks. What's the texture on this?
هلا دكتور قاسم. Thank you very much for explaining what's behind this big boom of Quranic fragments. But I've been studying in the last 6 months the Quranic copies which belong to Al-Hujra al-Sharifa.
Yes.
Does these people who are claiming a lot of things, and you know what's behind there, and you explained what is behind these claims, do they go back to history and historical texts? I have read in Ibn Zibala and Ibn Shabba, that Imam Malik ibn Anas,
I mentioned this.
yeah, he was against reciting Quran in the great mosque of Medina,
Yes.
because they depend until his time on memorization. So they make noise, and he made a fatwa that it is not right for them to recite Quran in the mosque, so they don't disturb people who are praying. Az-Zarkashi was against, and he tried. But Az-Zarkashi, at the later stage, later time, he made a fatwa without knowing the environment and the time of Imam Malik. And both Ibn Shabba and Ibn Zibala, they said at their time there were only two copies of either fragments, or one of Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf and the other of Al-Mahdi.
Yes.
Nothing was mentioned
Of the Imam.
until Ibn Jubair, who came to Medina, and he said, I have seen Mus'haf Sayyidina Usman. And this was a claim. It wasn't right. Until the 3rd century, there were no Quran, complete Quran in Al-Hujra al-Sharifa. This was later. In the same time, according to the parchment you explained, Al-Azraqi mentioned Banu Jumah,
Yes.
and he said they were responsible to produce parchment, but it was the rudimentary parchment using Nura for Dibaga. And this kind of parchment that they are claiming, it was not produced at in Mecca or Medina. This is maybe produced other, whatever the dates that you analyze.
Your long story can be shortened in few sentences. First, read the Samhudi, what he said about the Quran, and how many times the Masjid al-Sharif was burnt, and what was burnt in the Al-Hujra al-Sharifa. Second thing, the Quran was recited in the Masjid. Otherwise, the Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu would not commission any Sahabi to read the Quran in the Taraweeh in the Masjid, and commissioned the other Sahabi, I think he was Aus Tamim, whatever his name, to recite, to lead the ladies in the Taraweeh as well. So the Quran was read loudly, not even silently, in the Haram al-Sharif, in the mosque. About the Quran, whatever the copy, Ibn Najjar in the beginning of the 7th century, he said it clearly and loudly. There is no copy whatsoever. What is left was Duthira al-Ayyam al-Azman, and its papers tafarraqat. Yes, yeah. So there was no copy at all reached us whatsoever of the time of the Uthman. What reached us, just copies.
The question is, does these people goes back to historical texts?
No, but I told you, I couldn't read everything. I can tell you, they wanted to prove that the Quran is a man's made. So simple as that. Yeah.
Thank you. you, Dr. Qasim. Just I think many travelers already mentioned that is they have seen some manuscripts of the Uthmani Quran. Ibn Battuta is one of them, and others also in Medina and Damascus and Cairo.
Them all here.
Yeah. My question is actually about that fragment or that folio that you displayed, I think, from Yemen.
That's not from Yemen. It is from Stanford.
Yeah, where it stays that is Tammat Surat al-Ma'idah. Yeah, and doesn't attract your attention that is what comes after Al-Ma'idah and our Quran now is Surah Yunus, not Surah Maryam.
No, the difference arrangement is well known.
Yes, of course.
It is well known.
That was maybe from another order of the surahs in another copy.
The order, I said it here, there was no divinely
Yeah, that's right.
order. This is by Baqlani, he said that.
Thank you very much.
I mean, the arrangement of the Quran, according to the length now, what we have in the Quran is only according to the length of the surahs. Yeah, not even all. Yes.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, I do.
Nadeem Al-Hassani, Oxford University. I was just a bit surprised that you were questioning the carbon dating process. I wasn't entirely sure on what basis you were doing that.
According to the Oxford laboratory itself.
Okay, but I wasn't entirely sure what the arguments were. But just separately from that, what I wanted to ask you was, what is your opinion about other similar fragments that exist, perhaps from other traditions, i.e. the Greek and the Latin traditions, that do not have a date, and where we have a similar situation or a similar scenario? What do you think should we say about those fragments and documents as well? So again, I'm getting you to sort of think across other traditions. Lots of things are not dated, which might not prove something, but they might not, they might not disprove the date or the authenticity. Just because we don't have a date doesn't necessarily mean that we've got enough evidence to disprove perhaps their approximate age.
Yes. Well, I think you dealt with two things. First of all, I'm not concerned about Latin or Greek parchments or whatever they are. I'm not. The second, if they were falsified or faked, it is not my subject to deal with it as well, unless it is an Islamic text or Islamic book.
Sure, but if a similar situation arises...
I'm not concerned about non-Arabic, non-Islamic.
Because we have in existence many manuscripts that are not dated, there's no signature.
This belongs to other experts.
But it's a similar scenario or a similar situation?
No, I don't think so.
You don't think it's a similar situation?
No.
Why do you think that?
Well, I mean, if you look at the old text of the New Testament or the Old Testament, that would lead us to till tomorrow. I mean, I can't speak about all this, but I restrict myself with what I am talking about. I think it is the
I'm not sure if that's a good enough explanation. But anyway, I mean, the point is lots of documents and fragments from history come to the fore, and we have them in front of us. Experts have to assign a date, an approximate date. It's a bit of detective work, a bit of guesswork is involved. But I'm just worried about what the basis is for your emphasis on the fact that there are no dates. For some of these mushafs, there's no dating. That's true for many historical documents.
But to start with, I don't know Greek.
You don't need to know Greek. You don't need to know. You don't need to know Greek. All you need to know is the process.
No.
Whether the process is similar.
No, the writing has got a great deal to do with the book. The style of writing, the sort of ink used, all the signs in the manuscript, whether it's Greek or Latin, this all indications to lead you to a date. So I am not concerned at all with Latin or Greek. The methodology my methodology applied only to the Islamic manuscripts. Yes.
I take the last question and we'll close it like that.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Your opinion, your enlightened opinion, is certainly valuable to be brought on this particular issue. However, I think we need to keep the other options open, because measurements are valuable, and the carbon dating technique is an established technique. And I think you mentioned you said that the Oxford laboratory said about the variability of the carbon in air. Certainly that applies across geological times, but I think it's fairly constant over the last, over the last millennia. It doesn't vary greatly, and I think this is a valuable lead, because it helps answer some questions, because some Orientalists have doubted, have doubted even the Quran, and because they said it's a later fabrication, if you like. Now, this manuscript is saying to us it could be traced just after the death of the Prophet, so it's contemporaneous with probably some of the Khulafa or the Sahaba. So it's something which is worth pursuing. However, as an experimentalist myself, when I measure something in laboratory, I don't claim this to be the absolute truth. So I need to wait for other laboratories to corroborate this. So what we should be asking is for this carbon dating to be done by other laboratories, and also to be applied to the parchment itself and to the ink, because the ink may have been made from carbon material, and therefore it could be also carbon dated. And I think if we get 3 or 4 laboratories to do the testing, then we can aggregate the results and come up with the right conclusion.
You are right. Yeah, you are right. I think the only positive point I see in the fragments of Birmingham is it confirms that our Quran is not altered. It is the same. I mean, the parchment, the 2 folios, they confirm verbatim to the surahs or ayahs we have today. So this is actually a positive point we at it. But the other point, there are points of arguments. You can argue with it. I don't close the sphere of argument. Do.
Instant, assume that you agree on the date of the parchment, say 300 years after the Prophet. But in it there are false verses. They don't agree, like you just said, well, it confirms. But suppose they didn't confirm, right? What will be your reaction then? And in my view, my very simplistic understanding, I was taught when I was a kid that there is this isnad, right? That Muslims need to verify who the author was, who the writer was, where did he get it from, and whether he was a liar or not, right? Now,
this is in hadith.
So, hadith, but I mean, what would you say that, okay, even if it was 300 years after, and suppose there were some of the verses or the words were written in there, they were not in agreement with the Quran that we know about, what would have been your reaction?
To tell you the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, I didn't understand your question.
You are biased by the fact that you believe that the Quran is 100% God's word, right? And therefore, if you find now any piece of a parchment which has a different wording, right, you will say that is not correct, right? Now, what I'm trying to say is that in the logic, in the process of Islamic isnad, the hadith and so on, they would say, okay, now, who has written this? Where did he get it from? And is any of them is known to have told a lie or anything like that? It could have been deliberately inserted. That I would have thought would have been a reasonable reaction.
It could be. Could be. I don't
So we don't know who's the writer. We don't know where he got it from.
But you based all your argument on supposed thing. You didn't base your argument on solid evidence.
Well, that's the problem with modern scientists, you know. We have to.
Okay. I have to apologize for not being able to take more questions because I think we have crossed the limits of time now. I do thank Professor Qasim on your behalf for his interesting lecture and very informative one. I'm sure there are many points, as I mentioned before, where due to the time were left out, but hopefully they will be in the printout of the lecture. So thank you very much, Professor Qasim, for being here with us today. I realize that it has been a long day for you. I mean, the visit to Birmingham and long-standing, more than 2 hours now. So thank you so much for being with us tonight and for your lecture. Thank you so much. It has been a great pleasure to have you all here tonight. So thank you so much and look forward to see you again.